I have 2,500
So
videos,
anything that's
okay?
sugar and starch drives inflammation.
Here are the
25
5 supplements that
So
can
sometimes
In
when
this
you go to
study,
China,
scientists
it's
show
hard
us
to
that
find.
the internet is overflowing with health advice from doctors, gurus, and influencers pushing their takes on everything under the sun. That's exactly why we're launching the Root Cause podcast, to cut through the chaos and deliver clear, evidence-based functional health insights in bite-sized chunks from the experts who live and breathe this work, so you can jump straight to the part that resonates most. Take our first episode, where I chat with Dr. Wian, a South African functional medicine veteran with 30 years of hands-on experience. He's not just sharing theory, he's unpacking the real drivers of today's health battles. We dive into chronic inflammation, that sneaky force behind so many chronic conditions, and arm you with practical, no-nonsense strategies for weight loss that build lasting habits, not quick fixes. Dr. Stander also gets real on supplements, how to use them wisely to rebalance your body without the overload. And we tackle the tough stuff, the sharp rise in autism and ADHD, exploring root causes like gut imbalances and environmental toxins, while highlighting actionable support for families walking that path. Functional medicine isn't hype. It's about getting to the why so you can heal for good. And if this resonates, please share this episode with someone who needs it and hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop on more root cause revelations. Your support means we can keep the real talk coming. Before we start with any medical questions, Doc, I want to know, why did you exit the traditional medical space and pursue what you are doing right now?
So we were traditionally taught to take care of patients, not to let them be involved in the decision-making process. So my frustration was, I'd see a patient returning in 2, 3 or 6 months, asking for a repeat prescription, not really giving me proper feedback on how they were progressing and feeling, and that just frustrated the heck out of me. So I just decided that I wanted to look for a proper healthcare model, not an acute care model, a sick care model, where I wanted to empower the patient to take ownership of their own health, and functional medicine delivers on all those modalities.
Wow. So I want to know, is the natural route really potent enough?
Okay, so is natural potent enough? So I think I'd start with, maybe if you want to know if natural is potent, go and tuck on the tail of a black mamba and see if a natural thing can be potent. So I think the answer could be yes. But in most cases, when patients arrive at the practice, you don't really know what their baseline nutritional profile is. So some of our patients are very depleted, and they'll be on a treatment regime or protocol for 2 to 4 weeks before they even start feeling a shift in their health. And some patients really do look after their baseline hydration and health, and they only need the first 7 to 10 days to start feeling the potency of a natural remedy.
All right, so I want to clarify, do you only treat with natural products, or do you follow a combination approach? Where do you see yourself in the industry?
So in the industry, I see myself as a disruptor, obviously. That's why I think we're having an in-depth, deep dive discussion on what really the root cause of disease might be and what we find it is. So from a medical perspective, because I am still a real doctor, we obviously use common sense. So wherever there's really an acute infection, I'm not going to take out the homeopathic remedy and a prayer, try to get the patient improved. I'm going to write the prescription, and we're going to deal with the pathogen specifically. But in general, most of our patients are taught to really get into a good state of health. So then natural tweaks and natural remedies, botanicals, and a little bit of chemical support might go a long way to get them over the edge so that their own innate immune system kicks in and gets rid of the pathogen.
All right, so if I'm a patient, let's say I am on a chronic medication, is your goal to completely wean them off of this medication, or is there situations where you would have both?
So part of my initial frustration with the exclusive pharmaceutical industry is that somewhere in our third year in biochemistry, we were taught nutrient depletions caused by chemical derivatives and chemical compounds. And most doctors and most physicians tend to forget that, or they bunk the class and just copied some notes from their friends to write the exams. But if you go and look at the specific nutrient depletion profile of each chemical drug, and that means whenever you take in a chemical prescription drug, your body needs to metabolize it and eliminate the inactive compounds and the active metabolites. So that means the body is depleted from natural resources via the liver pathway or the kidney pathway in detoxifying and eliminating the substance. So we first need to address the nutrient depletion profile of each specific chemical drug the patients are on. So generally the ideal would be to wean them off to the minimum effective dose of that specific prescription drug, but not necessarily take them off it completely. So I'm always tossed between how the patient responds initially to the chemical, addressing the nutrient depletion profile, and then wean them off on a minimum effective dose, staying on natural remedies as well.
Can you give me a good example of a situation in your practice where you would prescribe a chemical and already accommodate the depletion?
So I think a good one in this industry, and here the pharmaceutical industry is also coming to the table now, where they realize that there's a very specific sweet spot for antioxidants and vitamins to assist their solution for the patient population, and those would be cholesterol medication, especially the statin drugs. So if I get a patient and they really have a genetic type of profile cholesterol, so they've got a familial hypercholesterolemia and the LDL and the triglycerides are just through the roof, we know that with natural remedies and a proper lifestyle change, you can probably facilitate the 40% change in the cholesterol profile. So for those patients, we'll start on a statin prescription drug, and we know that the depletion profile specifically for the side effects would be a depletion of coenzyme Q10. So we would start off with a lower dose of a statin drug therapy, already anticipating the depletion of coenzyme Q10, so we would do a combination therapy. Some of the pharmaceutical drugs now even do blister packs where they give the statin solution plus the coenzyme Q10. So they're coming to the party as well.
Functional medicine is not a replacement for conventional care, but a powerful ally that amplifies it. So let's take a look at the split between Big Pharma and the wellness industry and where you draw the line, or better yet, where do you blend them? So I saw something quite worrying, that the wellness industry is now actually 4 times the same worth as the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry currently 1.6 trillion and the wellness industry 6.4 trillion. And it's unregulated. Where do you find yourself on that, or what's your comment on that?
So I think from a medical perspective, pharmaceutical products are rigorously studied through research and clinical trials specifically with measured outcomes, consistent findings, and predictive values on the outcomes. Whereas the wellness industry, as you rightfully say, very unregulated. Very few patients are informed on therapeutic dosages, and a lot of the manufacturers in the industry just slap on label claims and they hope that that will, from a marketing point of view, catch the consumer's eyes, and that will be the product that the consumer will reach for first, because the pun or the specific keyword or phrase that they're looking for is on the label claim. So both sides are a little bit guilty of not catering for the individual and the individual needs, but that's why functional medicine is so beautiful, because you really spend time with the patient and the family as a holistic approach, and then you dive deep to come up with personalized medicine and really get to a personalized package for their challenge and solution.
I like that. Something that I think is such a fun industry is the influencer industry. But I see so many wellness influencers making a lot of claims. I saw specifically someone who was selling essential oils, and they claimed that it's going to cure autism.
Yes, I think from the influencer example you just mentioned, some of them actually do get appointments as brand ambassadors as well. So they actually silently get a little bit of a kickback on the sales of their products. I'm always very, very careful and cautious to mention phrases like heal and cure and permanently reverse. So that's why the label claims, generally tells you something about the manufacturer, the ethics of the manufacturer. Are they there just for the monetary commercial point of view, or are they actually there for the individual?
So, Doc, I know that you recently launched your own supplement range. Why did you develop it? What was the heart behind it? And what's your philosophy on your product range?
For me, I love to walk around in pharmacies, and every single weekend I would see some of the same patient families and the same gatekeepers going to the same shelves, and they just piling up products that make very, very specific label claims, trying to fix a solution or challenge they might have at home. So in my tenure in the industry, the last 25 years, I've really gone from a point where I got so frustrated of just looking at different ethics of manufacturers and looking at the certificates of analysis that I decided to actually do embark on my own range, because I can determine the whole supply chain, literally from the raw material to the quality control in the lab, the packaging, the manufacturing, to the end product that gets onto the shelf for the patient and the consumer. So from just a normal consumer perspective, general layman, general housewives, or the businessman who just in a lunch hour walks into a retail store, pharmacy, or health shop, they would just go for something that's either front of office or on a sale, or something with a very specific label claim on how he or she feels on that specific day. Where for me, I like to go from even the raw material quality and the raw material perspective to really get the patient informed, take a deep dive into what the composition of the products are and what they need to look for even on the inactive ingredient side of a label on a product before they purchase it.
Omega-3s are hailed as a proven powerhouse for heart health and fighting inflammation. But the truth is, not all supplements deliver on that promise. So, what's the real deal? And how can you spot a quality one amid all the marketing noise? So give me an example of something where you see a bunch of nonsense, either online, in store, a classic product that when you see it, you are ready to criticize it.
So one where I'm very vocal, I don't know exactly which one you're referring to, but the first one that always gets me the zig in is omega-3 supplements, because it is, I think, a multi-million-dollar industry, as you previously alluded to it. And if you go and look at the omega-3 manufacturers and suppliers out there, it is a free-for-all type of game. And it's such a endless pit and abyss for patients to just fall in, because you get the specials of buy a bulk of 300 for the whole family, or you buy one, get one free. That should already ring alarm bells. But if you go and look at the specific label claim that a manufacturer is allowed to make, especially in South African context, only 30% of the active ingredient needs to be present in the composition or in the capsule to make a label claim. So if you go and look at omega-3 and they put big on the etiquettes 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 supplement, the minimum effective concentration that the regulatory authorities require for us to put in those capsules is 30%. That means on 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 supplement, 300 milligrams of that compound needs to be a omega-3 of sorts. Regardless of the ratios, the inter-individual ratios of EPA, DHA, only 30% needs to be omega-3 to slap on label claim.
And what's the rest?
So what is the 700 milligrams left to fill up and to use as flow substances and antioxidants or inactive ingredients? And usually you'll find on a 30% omega supplement, you'll see it's sunflower oil. So good old faithful canola oil or a trans fat or omega-9 that is dirt cheap, and that you can just fill up your 30% omega-3 and you can sell it as an omega-3 supplement ethically.
So, according to my understanding, omega-3 is supposed to assist in being anti-inflammatory. And isn't sunflower oil inducing inflammation? I mean,
Correct.
Is it even just then better not to take it at all?
Exactly. So if you understand the composition of your label on the product you're buying, and you understand what is the definition of an anti-inflammatory oil, what's the definition of pro-inflammatory oils, then you really start to need to know your stuff on the fine print, because it makes all the difference.
Give me the specifics. What must I look out for? If I'm in a store, what do I look out for?
If you typically you're interested in an omega-3 supplement, albeit for attention span, concentration, inflammation, chronic pain, hormone balance, skin, hair, nails, whatever the indication is that you're primarily after, you need to know that at least the composition of the 1,000 milligram capsule is 70 to 85% pure triple strength omega-3 concentrates only. And the inactives or the flow antioxidant substances they mix with, it should be something typically like a vitamin E or an amino acid that can base really well in an oil pairing. So that's what I would look for. Anywhere from a 70 to 85% plus composition of that 1,000 milligrams should be pure omega-3 oil.
And if you're a mommy in a store and you don't know how to look, what would be the scientific name? Because you always see at the back of labels these long names, difficult names. And I know we've got ChatGPT these days where you can just double check, but I want to know what's the specific words that you look for when you see the back of the label.
So the first thing that I generally look for is to see if it's a standard size 1,000 milligram omega-3 capsule, or are they actually giving you a larger capsule that can fit in 1,250 milligrams, and then for them to be actually transparent, put it on the label claim to say 500, 600, 700 milligrams of EPA, active ingredient, DHA, specific acid, anywhere between 300 and 500 milligrams in a composition per 1,000 milligrams, because some of them are clever with wordplay as well. So some of them would say a therapeutic dose or a daily dose would be 2 capsules, and then they'd say 2 capsules and give you a higher value of EPA and DHA. So you always need to read the fine print and do the maths.
Okay, so per 1 capsule, we are looking at 500 to 700, 800 of the
Of
EPA,
EPA.
and the DHA.
300 to 400 milligrams. Then you had a good ratio, because then you know they basically left with vitamin E as an antioxidant and a flow substance to really preserve the oils and to really just add additional value to the capsule.
You start your day energized and focused, only to be sidelined by fatigue, illnesses, and persistent joint pain. These aren't signs of aging or stress. They signal a common nutritional gap that undermines your energy, bone health, and immune function. And the solution is straightforward: a single essential nutrient that can restore balance and vitality. That nutrient, or should I rather say hormone, is called vitamin D3. What is your favorite supplement to prescribe in your practice?
So I would say it's probably one of the older and oldest vitamins and or hormones actually prescribed and available off shelf. And if you go more therapeutic dosage, it's available on prescription only, and that should be vitamin D3.
Why? What's so special about vitamin D?
Well, vitamin D3 is 101 years old this year, so it was discovered more than 100 years ago. So it had a birthday, a centenarian birthday recently. There's been a Nobel Prize that's been awarded for vitamin D3 specifically on a German scientist that discovered the cure for rickets, which is a bone condition in small children. But I mean, there's a very low dose needed to actually reverse and prevent the condition called rickets in some of the malnourished kids and children in the young, growing, developing years. So vitamin D3 is probably my first and go-to. If I had to go to the moon, I'd probably take a high quality, high potency omega-3 and a high dose, therapeutic dose vitamin D3.
What would a patient look like that's vitamin D deficient? How do you spot it?
So I would probably spot a patient that's got a little bit of hypometabolism. So that means their metabolism is already a little bit more sluggish. So that's typically a patient that should be a little bit more overweight than normal. So vitamin D3 is a great inducer of metabolism, regulator of metabolism, upregulator of metabolism. So patients that's slightly overweight, not obese or anything, just slightly out of where they feel comfortable. I always see it in a patient that's got a low mood energy. So it can either be a seasonal low mood thing, or it could actually be a mood disorder. So before I ever prescribe any mood-altering medication for any patient, as you know, we need to know what their vitamin D levels are first, because vitamin D might just be the thing that gets them out of their slump.
According to a normal GP, what would be a normal range? And according to the good doctor, what would be a normal range?
So, well, according to international medical practitioners, generalists, they would just say if your patients are above 20 nanograms per deciliter, they would probably tick the box on sufficient. The labs generally indicate sufficient above 20. Below 20, they say either insufficient, and in some cases, they actually say deficient when it's below 10. So from a medical perspective, there's a huge debate on what the optimal level is for vitamin D3. Functional doctors tend to steer more towards a therapeutic dosage and more towards where the Nobel laureates and the Nobel Prize winners are encouraging us to get our patients to, just from an optimal point of view. So from a medical perspective, there is a huge debate on vitamin D.
So, what's the amount?
So you first need to know if you have a doctor prescribing vitamin D2, which is calciferol, or vitamin D3, which is cholecalciferol. So from a medical perspective, D2 is technically your less active, less bioavailable vitamin, and that's the one that we generally get from sun and from our diet and foods. Then your liver and your kidney enzymes need to convert. They add 2 specific steps in the equation of conversion to get it to a bioavailable vitamin D3, and D3 is the one that you actually then absorb and utilize, and that's the fat-soluble one that your body can absorb.
Is there any possible glitches in that process from D2 to D3? So why don't we all just take the D2, because I'm sure it will be slightly more cost effective.
So it's definitely more cost effective, and it's been around for a very long time. So the problem is if you don't know what your patient's genetic composition is, you don't know what your patient's epigenetic profile looks like. So that means all the biochemical processes that happens inside the gut microbiome, inside the cell, outside the cell, and just around the cell environment to do those conversions. You wouldn't be able to know if the patient's got the biochemistry and the genetics to convert that vitamin D2 into an absorbable D3 form.
So classically, what would happen if a patient has that genetic glitch? They would become depleted, right?
So they would become depleted, and you'll typically find that they will show up with medical complaints and general medical signs and symptoms that we as medical doctors just think is the onset of chronic disease or the onset of a mood disorder coming or the onset of an acute episode in the making. And a patient would just walk up to me and say, "Doc, I'm either fatigued or tired. Doctor, I'm overweight or battling to lose weight. Or doctor, I've got a specific chronic pain, or the pain just feels that it's migrating in my body. And I can't specifically point it. And it's not that one where the finger is broken and doc, it's sore when I touch the shoulder and it's sore when I touch the elbow. So it's literally just this vague chronic pain that's migrating and they can't really pinpoint it. So those are typically the three big ones that patients present with initially. And the first thing you should look for is how depleted is that patient of vitamin D3.
I was always under the impression that the vitamin D is just from the sun. What's the reason why the sun isn't efficient for us?
The eyes have got little cones and rods at the back of the eye, and early morning sunrise, the first 10 to 15 minute sunrise is actually the best time in the morning just to spend outside, go and ground a bit and just get in touch with nature and just appreciate what God's created in and around us. And then for that first 15 minutes of vitamin D to be absorbed by the eyes, cones and rods. If you've got a specific eye condition, you're not going to get that benefit, and then you need to start whipping out the UV calendars to see what areas in the world and what time of day is going to be best for you to absorb safe UVA and UVB rays to actually do get a little bit of vitamin D through the skin, and then you have to go to the food stuff.
So you are telling me the nudists knew something we don't? I'm sure my brother, when he was about 3 years old, I remember he didn't want to wear clothes at all.
But he was happy all the time.
Doc, so if you test a patient for vitamin D, I'd like to know what's the range that you're looking at and what would typically be your prescription?
So also quite an interesting and controversial topic, but we're generally starting to come to a consensus. So if I test a patient and they've got a blood level of between 20 and 40 nanograms, then we know that they're already short of the minimum level that we want to get them to of 60 nanograms. After 60 nanograms, the body really goes into a regenerative spin and a regenerative phase. So from a medical point of view, anywhere below 60 nanograms, I would typically start at a dose of 10,000 international units of vitamin D3 daily that will raise your blood level, your blood count, by 10 units per month. So that's a very slow process. It's a fat-soluble vitamin, and it also depends on what type of quality of vitamin D3 you do. So some companies prefer food-grade products. I mean, as you well know, the reason why I went over to our own range is because we are pharma-grade. So pharma-grade, you know your dose exactly per capsule, and you can predict very accurately that they will raise 10,000 units daily. D3 will raise their blood level by 10 per month. So in general, in 3 months, we do a retest and then we start discussing a maintenance dose thereafter.
Typically, what would your maintenance dose be?
Maintenance dose will probably never fall below 5,000 units daily.
And this is not something you can just go into any pharmacy to the shop side of it. It's actually, if I'm correct, prescribed. It's a scheduled...
It's a scheduled substance. So vitamin D3 is actually an interesting one. It's a fat-soluble hormone. So it got the nickname 100 years ago being dubbed vitamin D. And you know, like nicknames always stick. So vitamin D was named vitamin D 100 years ago. Subsequently, we discovered it's a hormone ring and a hormone vitamin, but I mean, we still refer to it today as vitamin D3, even though it's an actual bioidentical hormone.
10,000 seems like a very high dose. I know that when I browse the aisles, I see, about 500 to 1,000 IUs. Now you have to explain this whole thing to me because that sounded quite scary to overdose on vitamin D.
So if you look at a typical off-shelf product, you'll see that they are anywhere between 400 and 1,000 international units, and that's the recommended daily allowance as prescribed to the regulator, by the regulator. So 400 units is actually the dose to prevent any patient in South Africa or in the Southern Hemisphere not to develop rickets. So when we look at the RDA, or the recommended daily allowance, I mean, those tables have been formulated in the 19 Footsack, so 1950 somewhere, and it's never been revised, and it's definitely not current, and it hasn't been updated in a very, very long time, in my opinion. So from a functional point of view, if you do prescribe a scheduled therapeutic dosage, that's why you journey with the patient takes ownership of it, and we do regular blood measurements, because a very high dose of vitamin D3 in some patients, very, very specific patients, can lead to kidney stones in some cases, and it can also lead to very specific neurological symptoms, of which the common one is a headache. So you need to monitor a patient frequently in the first 3 to 6 months of starting therapeutic dosages, so that we can really get to the maintenance dose as quick as possible.
I also read somewhere that the difference between the vitamin D2 and the vitamin D3, that the overdosing is easier with the vitamin D2 because of byproducts. Is there some truth in that?
Yes, there is. I mean, the vitamin D2 is generally an enterically coated tablet with a lot of inactives. And depending on the manufacturer, they put in salt carriers or toxic carriers that could accumulate and really start forming huge free radical spurts and secondary injuries in the body. And the vitamin D2 to D3 conversion, providing your patient's enzyme ratios are biochemically sound, you will probably get to a 10% conversion rate. So if you're on a 50,000 units vitamin D2, your patient's actual conversion rate will be around about 5,000 units of vitamin D3.
Inflammation is the body's natural immune defense against injury, infection, or threats. Acute forms, like ankle sprain swelling, resolve quickly to aid healing, but chronic low-grade inflammation fuels many modern diseases. Testing and managing it via lifestyle, diet, and targeted therapies is crucial for sustained health and resilience. Where does inflammation fit into the whole health picture?
My philosophy in the last 25 years have led to this specific statement, and that is that chronic inflammation and inflammation per se is actually the root cause of all chronic disease. So I hope we didn't just end the podcast right here. Because inflammation, as you know, is one of my keen interests. It's one of the big reasons why I've decided to leave mainstream medicine and go on to a functional medicine model, because discovering inflammation as a possible root cause for probably 90% of all my patients' diseases on a root cause analysis led me to change my practice as a whole. So inflammation, yes, is at the root of most of our health challenges. It's at the root of accelerated aging processes. It's at the root of free radical production. It's at the root of the pure, straightforward onset of chronic disease. Chronic disease of lifestyle, chronic disease from a genetic inheritance point of view, chronic disease from an environmental point of view. So inflammation is at the heart of every single chronic condition.
What's the reason for inflammation then?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So inflammation is your first step in the healing cascade after a patient sustained injury or immune response insult. So from a plain explanation point of view, if you imagine going into the kitchen and you drop your hand onto the oven plate by mistake, you're going to get a burn, right? Hopefully you take off your hand, because that's the appropriate response. So you get the burn, the sting, you pull away. The first thing you see is redness. Second thing you see is a swelling that starts to happen. And then in the end you form
Blisters.
a blister, yes, water retention. So inflammation is the first cascade and first step in the healing response. So if inflammation is controlled in a very specific physiological way, it generally lasts between 10 to 14 days. But if you're exposed to chronic injuries, low-grade inflammation is sustained, and you actually caught up in a cycle of where you just literally produce the redness, the swelling, the water retention, the tissue destruction chronically, and never getting over into a proper healing response.
So how do you test for inflammation? What would be the things you test for?
So I've got a very specific panel of bloods that we do to test for systemic inflammation and organ inflammation. So everybody's very familiar with CRP. So that's the blood level that you test for when a family member's in ICU and or just after theater, and they say, after theater, the infection count started rising. So that's CRP. There's also a subfraction of CRP called ultrasensitive CRP that's more pertaining to cardiometabolic health. So it gives you a very good risk prediction factor of cardiovascular disease for that patient. The second one that's probably starting to rise to number one worldwide is uric acid. So uric acid is a natural byproduct in the body, but a very, very specific optimal range for uric acid level to be maintained at to prevent certain disease profiles from developing. So uric acid's the second one. Third one, homocysteine. So homocysteine is also a very specific cardiovascular risk disease marker. So those three I'd probably say is our standard go-to. If I have those three inflammation markers, I'd probably be able to tell you if this patient's going to develop a high blood pressure profile in the future, if they're going to develop high cholesterol, albeit genetic profile or just lifestyle modification that's needed. And I'll probably be able to predict their first real big life event or chronic disease diagnosis that could be made in the next 10 to 15 years.
You've mentioned the 3 different inflammation markers. You've mentioned the vitamin D. What's the actual measurements that you want ideally?
Okay, so it's a technical question, so let me try to drill it down. If we take a patient, Fred, for instance. So Fred comes to consult with us, and he's got those basic 3. Remember, there are multiple inflammation markers you can test for. And if there's an autoimmune patient sitting in front of you, there's a whole different panel of inflammatory markers you also include. But I mean, those basic 3, and Fred comes and he sits and he consults, and we put him on a treatment program. 3 months later, he goes to just do a follow-up blood result, comes back, and we compare to see if there's been an improvement, make alterations. That's typically what a patient wants to do, to partner with his functional medical practitioner, partner with his doctor, and really take ownership of his own health. So ideally, I would tell Fred this. So he comes in for his first consult, and his vitamin D level is, say, for instance, at 37 nanograms. And we know that he's a keen cycler, and he wants to improve his VO2 max. He wants to lose a bit of weight just to cycle even better. I would get him above 60 nanograms. And to do that, I'd probably give him 10,000 units of vitamin D3 per day for 3 months. And he should be somewhere between 60 and 80 nanograms. The minute we see he's in the therapeutic range, in the optimal range, then I would put him on a dosage of 5,000 units of D3 daily as a maintenance dose, still measure him 60 or 90 days later to see if he's not utilizing himself out of that therapeutic range and back into a deficient range. So it's going to initially be a 2 to 3 measurement interval, and you'll probably within 9 to 12 months be able to figure out what Fred's ideal vitamin D therapeutic dose and maintenance dose levels will be. So if he comes with these inflammation markers, so these are big ones, but functional doctors and integrative doctors internationally at least agree upon the reference ranges. So the lab tends to give us a very broad reference range. But if you look at an ideal or optimal range, especially if you want to optimize as a CEO, a businessman, an entrepreneur, a sportsman, or literally you just want to feel better, or you want to start embarking on a journey of longevity and a better health span, uric acid should typically be sitting on 0.32 millimoles per liter. The different labs use different metrics. So I know in the Northern Hemisphere, they use the milligrams per deciliter. So that value should be 5.5. That's absolute, from children to 100 years old, to centenarians. So if your uric acid is managed, and this you can do with your functional medical doctor or your general practitioner, if they really understand cardiometabolic health, they will really assist you to drive down uric acid to below 0.32 or 5.5. So that's the ballpark for uric acid. And remember, it's the number 1 cardiovascular disease risk marker worldwide. And we always thought it was just all about the gout. So it's not about the gout. It's managing uric acid because it's got such a knock-on effect on health in multiple systems. The third one is homocysteine, and homocysteine, a lot of people are very informed when it comes to homocysteine because we have a huge population, very inflamed. And once you start measuring these, they're always curious to see, once you start to treat, is the track and trend, is it actually coming down? So are we actually improving our longevity, the way we age, the way we deflame? So homocysteine is an interesting one. I always say the lower the better. The sweet spot probably sitting at about 7. At least it always has to be single digits. The minute your homocysteine levels tend to go into double digits, and the minute it goes over 13, 14, then you really need to have a acute intervention and a really strict anti-inflammatory protocol to offer that patient. So homocysteine, sweet spot, probably sitting at 7. Uric acid, 0.32, 5.5 milligrams per deciliter. And if we go and we have a look at the ultrasensitive CRP, if it's below 1, your cardiovascular risk health is at low risk. If it's between 1 and 3, the labs tend to classify as moderate cardiovascular disease risk. Above 3 is high risk. So then you have a proper interventional anti-inflammatory protocol to drive down that inflammation. And just from a practical point of view, then Fred sits with me, he works 90 days, take ownership, he drives down those inflammation markers. If one of them tend to increase, you know that, listen, you need to change your product, because homocysteine can be managed off shelf, on the shelf at a retailer or at a big retail pharmacy. You just need to know which type of product to really lower that homocysteine effectively. Because we know from a genetic perspective, it's usually the patients who battle with methylation. So we'll touch on methylation and the gene profiles and DNA analysis a little bit later, but we know that they are generally poor methylators and their homocysteines tend to rise. And the minute you start treating their homocysteine, all of a sudden, all the other methylation symptoms start to improve.
Sure, now we know how to test for inflammation, but we also spoke a little bit about acute inflammation. So let's say I went to play paddle, I hurt my knee, and I'm in pain, obviously. So, you know, when you go to a GP, normally there's this injection that they offer that will take away the pain or, you know, help you heal, also anti-inflammatory injection. What is that injection, and is that something I should go for?
So from a medical perspective, so that's general practitioners, specialists, sports physicians, all the doctors. If you generally present with an acute injury, they tend to whip out one of 2 injections. The one which is a steroid injection or cortisone, as patients know it. And the other one is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, which is something like diclofenac or ibuprofen or something. And it really works well. Why? Because it kills the pain, reduces the swelling, and the patients perceive that they are healed or that they have improved, and all of a sudden they back onto the same paddle court within a very short period, but with a very specific scar that's formed because of that management approach and healing approach that happened in that specific ligament or structure or joint. So you get a patient that's back a lot quicker. They've got a weakened structure or weaker ligament or muscle to go back to the same sport they got the injury, and they start to re-tear and re-injure. So that's not the permanent solution. So what we tend to do is we take an acute injury, we look at the inflammation profile, we look at the specific structures. Are you dealing with a sprain or a strain or a specific tear? You grade the tear, and then according to the definitive diagnosis, then we can always take out also a syringe, also a needle. But what we do to manage that acute injury way better, in my view, is with a little bit of dextrose, which is a metabolically neutral sugar. It's a hypertonic solution of sugar that you go and you do a specific injection site on the injury site, not just one mik and druk, and it's one injection and the whole system deflames and lowers pain and swelling, but you actually have a very specific injury site that you inject. You cause a low-grade, very controlled inflammation that follows after that injection, and then the body goes through that normal 2-week curvature where you're supposed to have your tissue remodeling and the tissue proliferation phase, where you actually get to a better scar that forms, a more permanent scar and a more natural scar that forms, to get the patient or the athlete back to sport again.
So in simple terms, that injection is sort of, again, cutting off the signal.
Yeah, so the cortisone shot or the Voltaren shot or whatever kills the inflammation signal instantly. The body goes into rest mode. The patient is informed to just generally rest, and that resting is actually way more valuable than the one shot that fixes all things. And the patient goes back to the same sport, re-injuring because they've got a weakened structure. So our approach is more to take them through that inflammation, guide the inflammation, keep it at a controlled level, and then get to a real healing of that structure.
So there's this trend on TikTok where they say, if you were not afraid to hurt my feelings, what would your advice be? And I want you to really think about my question. If you were not afraid to hurt the feelings of our patients, our listeners, would you say that your treatments are effective if the patient is not compliant in the lifestyle leg of it?
So, unfortunately, I cannot say with a wholehearted statement, emphatic yes. Because if the patient doesn't take ownership and work with his functional doctor and work with us to manage their health and steer it back into well-being and wholeness, then it's very difficult to convince a patient that an anti-inflammatory lifestyle approach will be beneficial long-term, because you have this very inflamed system. You try to instill anti-inflammatory treatment modalities and protocols, but it just dilutes into a whole abyss of just inflammation. So the patient's not really convinced because they don't feel or sense the improvement and the healing phase that's actually taking place. So you don't have their full buy-in. They're probably going to have a very subjective opinion on the anti-inflammatory lifestyle approach. So yes, we want the patient to be more than 80% compliant. Otherwise, we just lose beautiful molecules and supplements and injectables, natural injectables, into a whole bottomless pit of inflammation. And you get that dilution effect, and they're not convinced, their family's not convinced, and you probably won't see a patient with a lasting result.
So if there's one final thought you'd like people to remember after this episode, what would that be?
Final thoughts. I'd say you have to know if you're inflamed or if you are in a deflamed state. So the only way you know if you carry inflammation is always silent, so we have to measure it. So if we measure, we know. So om te meet is om te weet. So from a medical perspective, I think you should take ownership. You should be informed. You should measure your inflammation markers. You track it on an Excel spreadsheet, and you can really follow in a cumulative report via the labs. You can track and trace your inflammation trends as you go in and out of season of activity or in and out of season of an immune response or immune insult in your body. So I think to measure is to know, to install real-world modalities, functional medicine protocols to manage that inflammation. That really drives inflammation to a low enough point where your body can get to a state of healing.
Inflammation is a natural defense mechanism, but everyday habits can push the body into a persistent, low-grade inflammatory state. Common triggers include dehydration, ongoing stress, long-term medication use that disrupts the gut balance, and modern lifestyle factors such as an inactive lifestyle, processed foods, poor sleep, and environmental toxins. Understanding and addressing these can help reduce chronic inflammation and support overall well-being.
If you look at probably the main culprit, looking at what causes this chronic low-grade inflammation, it's patients chronically dehydrating. Patients not making their water equation and their water quota per 24 hours. So patients on a chronic dehydration pathway are generally more prone to chronic low-grade inflammation, and that is why I put that as an actual cause of chronic inflammation in the modern day and age.
How much water should a person drink?
Well, if you look at my favorite equation of water and optimal hydration, then for every 10 kilograms of body mass that we carry, we should be averaging 300 milliliters of clear water. So for every 10 kgs, 300 mils of water to really put out all low-grade inflammation and have enough in excess to eliminate toxins and have enough to dilute your blood and have enough to support liver and brain and kidney and heart function just for normal biochemistry.
So is that equation the same if I drink a lot of coffee or tea, maybe some wine?
So if you look at all the above mentioned, they are all diuretics by definition. So that means they actually dehydrate you each milliliter that you consume of that substance. So say, for instance, you weigh 50 kilograms, then our baseline water equation stipulates that you should be consuming 1.5 liters of clear water. Say you consume 2 cups of coffee a day, then that means you will need to add half a liter plus 500 milliliters to just get to that break-even point, still keeping you at your equilibrium of 1.5 liters. Otherwise, if you just drink your 1.5 liter, 2 cups of coffee, your net result for the day is 1 liter of H2O in your body, and you are starting to produce chronic inflammation. So just to lead on again on your question on causes of inflammation, so dehydration is probably at my most practical number one list. Second one would be stress, acute or chronic stress, because stress sets off a whole cascade in our bodies that just really utilizes a lot more resources than we might have in our systems, depletes the body of water, and the body once again goes into a very specific depleted, dehydrated state. Looking at another cause of inflammation, insomnia is right up there. Poor sleep hygiene sets off a whole hormone and neurotransmitter cascade that really gets a patient into fight and flight mode, disruption of the circadian rhythm, and your body actually goes into a state of dehydration just because of a sleep hygiene pattern or circadian rhythm that's been disrupted. Looking at other causes of inflammation, we find chronic medication. Chronic medication, and why per se? Because of that nutrient depletion profile we earlier alluded to. So from a medical point of view, you have a lot of causes of inflammation that we can really, if we just know these things, we can actually do something about them from the minute the patient leaves the first consultation. The first meet and greet, they are equipped to start making small changes to address the inflammation that we see on their blood results or that we find in their bodies at specific sites.
Before we get to all the other causes, I'm really curious about the stress causing inflammation. So how would a typical person just relieve stress? What's the normal amount of stress? And what would be a normal pattern for stress? And what would be a pattern that you really want to sort out? And what would be something that you can do every day after work, before work, in your daily routine to get rid of some of that stress?
So unfortunately, it's not the same equation for everybody. So someone, for instance, on a tropical island have a different type of stress profile altogether, where someone in a city is burdened with a different environment, different sort of air pollution, different sort of dynamics in traffic, dynamics in a corporate work setup and environment. So you get your acute appropriate stress and you get your chronic low-grade stress. And stress in general, we measure on hand of your cortisol level. So if your adrenal glands are under pressure 24/7, after hours, during sleep, disrupted sleep patterns, poor sleep hygiene, your cortisol rhythm can never reset. And we know that insulin is a real copycat of cortisol. So if you get these frequent cortisol spikes, you get insulin also mimicking those spikes. You get these huge insulin spikes following the cortisol spike, and that's where the whole inflammation cascade then starts to go from subtle chronic low-grade inflammation to real measurable low-grade inflammation on blood levels.
So how would a person really manage their stress on a daily basis?
So just from a practical point of view, I think your body is your temple. You should listen to your body, so to be in tune with your body. So the first thing I do after a hard day's work or a stressful work environment or a conference where you really interacted with colleagues and patients, I get home and I take off my shoes and I go and stand outside and I ground. So I believe that's one of the modalities that God's given us, just to really have a conduit for the stress to really relay and seep into. From a practical point of view, so we've got 2 legs and 2 feet, most of us. So we could go for a nice brisk walk with our partners or family. You could get onto a bicycle and just go for a good cycle, 20 to 30 minutes of just moderate exercise, just to get those stress levels down into a manageable level.
In functional medicine, we view every meal as an opportunity to either calm inflammation or contribute to it. Diet isn't just about nutrients or calories. It's information that tells our cells how to function, how to repair, and how to protect us. In a world where chronic inflammation drives so many modern health issues, understanding how our daily food choices influence our biology is essential. Anti-inflammatory eating can restore balance, support longevity, and help us feel our best from the inside out. So, where does food fit into this whole picture of inflammation?
So food fits into the whole equation. So I also categorize it as a cause of inflammation, but generally it's more an aggravator than just a cause. But if you want to pick one of the bad boys in the food industry, I'd probably say sugar tops my list for a proper cause of acute and chronic inflammation. But if you already have underlying chronic low-grade inflammation in your system, in any body organ, consuming sugary beverages or sugar per se would be a huge aggravator of that inflammation.
What other food groups would be something to avoid?
So if you look at the 3 bad players in the process environment that we really find ourselves in, I would say sugar still tops my list as a cause and an aggravator. I'd say if you go into the camp of any GMO product. So think of any consumer brand, any consumer goods product you find in the shelf on a grocery store that's got a expiry date on it. So that would probably be wheat and gluten products. And the third one that very few people are reminded of, but very, very specific inflammation patterns, especially neuroinflammation, is dairy products, cow's milk.
What in the cow's milk? Is it the lactose?
So it's a good question. So a lot of moms stumble upon this whole cow's milk and lactose intolerance, and then they go for the lactose-free products, but the dairy still contains the protein casein in it. So by original design, casein was intended for the calf, not for us. So from a medical point of view, you take casein in its raw form, it's less harming, but unfortunately we in a high consumer industry, so our shelf lives play a specific role on the commercial side. So we have to preserve and we have to GMO the products. So even if you take out the lactose, you're still left with that casein bomb, GMO from dairy, and it causes a lot of especially neuroinflammation. And then I'd say the fourth one, probably one that very few people know of, but those are the culprits of the seed oils. So if you look at the amount of seed oils as preservatives and as active ingredients in food substances to keep up a shelf life and to really just be the main ingredient in food substances, it's a huge cause of inflammation. It's a huge aggravator of inflammation.
I'm quite interested in different diet ideas. Do you have a specific diet that you believe people should follow? I know that you have the goddess diets and you've got the keto diets. What would you think is the solution?
So from a medical perspective, I do believe that any diet or meal plan that you stick to will work because you focus on cutting out the nonsense. Albeit a blood group diet, albeit a keto, a modified Mediterranean, I prefer just the principle of the anti-inflammatory diet. So the acronym spells out AID, because then you will aid your body into actually managing down inflammation, and to have that deflamed state gives you a sense of wholeness, a sense of energy and vibrance that all the high energy foods with no nutrients, with less dense nutrients, really just get you onto an inflammaging pathway.
I'm a big fan of Jamie Oliver, and obviously now I would not be eating the pastas and the pizzas, but a big part of his campaign is that we should eat seasonal. Do you think there's any truth in that, or is that a bunch of nonsense?
No, absolutely. No, I love that approach. The same that you even mentioned previously, that your recipes have been passed down from generation to generation. What was the benefit with the previous generations? Less GMO'd food, more authentic, more real food, and where people had to actually go and figure out their own recipes. But they all started with real food, with raw materials, and they came up with the beautiful recipes we know today. So one thing Jamie Oliver always says, and that's one thing I commend him for, is that the time you take to prepare your food is the time you should take to consume it. So if you have something that you can just stick into a microwave for 2 minutes, or 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, think. Because then you should consume it in 2 minutes and you're never going to reach a satiety point, because you're going to get this huge sugar spike and you're going to get that insulin response, inappropriate insulin release, and you're going to get that sugar drop, and you're literally hungry again within 15 minutes. So from his perspective, I love seasonal because it makes sense. Rich, real, authentic food that you can see. I mean, if you take out any label and you have to turn it around, and you read any ingredient, active or inactive ingredient, and it starts with E250, E125, whatever, you won't be able to pronounce that. So how on earth is your body going to be able to process and metabolize that? So that's the principle. That's why I love his philosophy of eat in season and stay raw and authentic and real food.
So if there would be a Dr. Wian diet, am I correct if I say it would be a gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free diet as well, incorporating different foods at the different seasons as we go along and just cooking from scratch?
So if I could coin a diet, that would be known as the anti-inflammatory diet, but with a few tweaks here and there. So if you look at a plate to consume, there should be a fresh, never frozen meat or protein of sorts. There should be fresh fruit, vegetables. There should be a healthy carb, no gluten, no dairy, water, stock, fresh spices and herbs, and probably a good jug of water.
I know when you normally say, go eat gluten-free, people immediately think that one aisle in the grocery store that got all the little packets of gluten-free pasta, gluten-free pizza base. What would you say about that?
So I would just say, let's just go back to basics. So if in the food industry, unfortunately, we only have sugar and fat to make food taste like something. So the minute you go gluten-free, you've got to add either a trans fat or sugar to the product to give it a little bit of a sense of taste. Otherwise, you'd never have a repeat customer. So don't go for a gluten-free product. Just go for no gluten, no dairy, and get back to authentic cooking.
So if I'm at a restaurant, I should look for piece of steak, vegetables, and a glass of wine. Is that my order?
So the minute you go to a restaurant, whip out the menu before you get to the restaurant so that you don't make an impulsive decision when you're sitting there, already hunger pangs coming into the equation and forcing you to go for a high carby meal. So the minute you sit down, you can start ordering in a very safe environment for you and your family.
Doc, that's very planned out. I'm much more impulsive when it comes to my social life and my family life. So you say that I should look for items on this menu that I should order. But let's say you're traveling. You are somewhere abroad. You don't know where you're going to eat. You see a nice little place. You pop in. What do you look out for on a plate?
It would be everything in moderation. Cut out all the nonsense, all the junk, all the preservatives, anything with the expiration date. Be careful. Just be wise. But a good, healthy meat, regardless of color, red, white, fish, or alternatives. I mean, you can go legumes, you can go lentils, you can go chickpeas if you do alternative proteins, real vegetables that you can actually see and that your body can recognize. I love color and variety, so there's always color in the plate, and then just everything in moderation. And if you don't reach a satiety point during the meal, then you know you're probably not hitting the macros and micros as you should. And then it would probably be wise to go and see a functional dietitian or nutritionist to really start tweaking the ratios of protein per body kilogram, just the ratios of macros and micronutrients that you are consuming so that they can optimize and tweak that little 15 to 20% result you're looking for per day.
One of the most fundamental markers of long-term health is blood pressure. In functional medicine, we see blood pressure not just as a number, but as a reflection of the body's overall balance, its stress levels, vascular health, inflammation, nutrition, sleep quality, and daily habits. Elevated blood pressure rarely happens in isolation. It's the result of many small signals that add up over time. By understanding how our lifestyle shapes these signals, we gain power to prevent, lower, and stabilize high blood pressure naturally. What would be a normal range for blood pressure, firstly? And then secondly, is there something natural we can do in the meantime? And by when do we get really, really worried that we need intervention?
Okay, so say for instance we have Fred coming to consult with us again, and he said he's upregulating his vitamin D levels, his chronic pain and inflammation markers tend to be driving down and lowering slightly, but his local doctor and his GP picked up that he's borderline hypertension or high blood pressure. So what happens in that event? So if you're not on the optimal range of those inflammation markers, how they actually work and function, if you just imagine your cardiovascular system, so you've got your heart as a pump, and it pumps out into a pipe system. So those pipes are obviously a continuous flow with the same volume of blood flowing through that system. So if you have homocysteine that's in double digits, for instance, say Fred's uric acid is 0.43, so he's not into gout territory yet, but he is functionally on his way there, and subclinically is actually hyperuricemic. So that's the fancy word for high blood uric acid levels. So what those crystals do, because they actually have a 3D pattern with very sharp like little tentacles and crystals in a very 3D shaped pattern. So as they flow through the pipe system, they tend to nick and tear and make small little micro lesions on the inner lining of that endothelium. So you call it a vascular endothelial little injury or lesion. So what happens when I throw a brick at you? You try to duck, right? Hopefully. That's the appropriate response. So when you have a little nick in a segment or a section of your vascular endothelial, that same response of ducking to try to get away, not to be injured, happens in your veins and your arteries because they vasoconstrict. So it's almost as if clenching away, so they vasoconstrict in that segment where the injury occurs, and for that millisecond, split second in that segment, you'll register a high blood pressure episode. So it's not a diagnosis of high blood pressure, but now remember it's a continuous flowing pipe system. So now you've got your pump beating and you've got this pipe system, and every now and then you've got these crystals in excess and they cut and tear and form small little lesions, and then your pothole brigade is on its way to go and heal up that injury or that little laceration or lesion. And the minute the healing is facilitated and the injury is closed up, that vasoconstriction relaxes again. Then you register normal blood pressure in that segment. So now picture this in a continuous loop system, continuous flow. So if you get into a stressful period, say you have 2 cups of coffee in the morning, you go to a board meeting, all of a sudden something happens, the FD cuts the salaries by 10% and you're a little bit under pressure and stress, you have a 3rd cup of coffee, now your veins, because of the dehydration effect, start to vasoconstrict. You've got these crystals floating in the pipe system, in the vasculature, causing small little cuts and tears and lesions, and your vasoconstriction, so the vessel narrowing effect, is more continuous in larger segments of this pipe system. Now you're starting to get to a borderline high blood pressure event. Now it's not just the episode, but now you're getting events. So sometimes Fred will go to his GP and it's borderline high blood pressure. So that's 140 over 90 millimeters of mercury. So a functional doctor always tries to manage the patients below 135 over 85 with a decent heart rate. Heart rate's a topic for another day. So from a medical perspective, now Fred is sitting with his doctor, and Fred is now starting to subconsciously stress over his health because his vitamin D level is in a regenerative mode. All of a sudden, his inflammation markers are better, but they're still causing small little lesions and injuries. We're optimizing his body's healing response, but now he's got this intermittent picture of borderline high blood pressure, borderline not. So if you really want to be therapeutic about it, that's when you get to the therapeutic options and the therapeutic levels of those inflammation markers, because that's when you get a patient that's not already received the diagnosis of high blood pressure into a state where they can really manage their blood pressure better and well and holistically, with them taking ownership, forming that partnership with their doctor. So 135 over 85 blood pressure, I would say I would already start treating actively with a homocysteine lowering molecule or supplement. I would definitely get my uric acid into that sweet spot of 0.32 millimoles and less, or 5.5 milligrams and less. And I would definitely get my ultra-sensitive CRP below 1. Once you do that, you automatically going to see your blood pressure coming down by at least 7 over 3 millimeters of mercury, or perhaps 10 over 5 millimeters of mercury. So if you were Fred and you were sitting on 140/91, 140 over 95, and we could drop it 7 over 5 or 10 over 5, all of a sudden he's in a normal blood pressure range. And he's done it by measuring, by taking wise decisions, by taking supplements daily and diligently, making lifestyle modifications and sticking to the protocol, forming a partnership with his doctor. With that collaboration, he's managing his blood pressure into a normal state.
So the typical GP would rather then, would they start prescribing real medication at that stage, or where's the difference with functional medicine versus normal medicine?
I think functional medicine is giving the patient the opportunity to be informed, really spending not a 10-15 minute consultation, but 60 to 90 minutes, really educating the patient on what metrics and what measurements they should be concerned about, and really getting them informed. That's how they take ownership, and that's why they measure and remeasure and then follow a maintenance protocol. And then bouncing back to their doctor as a sound port once a year, once they've taken the proper ownership of their health and they're steering them into a longevity spell. So a classic doctor would probably not consider all the ideal therapeutic ranges, even though we taught this at universities. Universities tend to sometimes also teach error because they just teach us to diagnose, instill treatment, remeasure. If the metric has changed and the blood pressure comes down, now you are treating your patient. Whereas it's actually just a plaster on a symptom. It's a plaster on a cancer sort of scenario. So we want a patient to really get into a rejuvenated, regenerated system and buy back time, lower inflammation, and actually prevent them from receiving that chronic disease diagnosis.
Functional medicine isn't about quick fixes. It's about understanding how your body truly works and giving it what it needs to thrive. Inflammation, nutrition, supplements, sleep, movement, they're all interconnected pieces of the same puzzle. Small, intentional choices, repeated consistently, can shift your biology towards healing, resilience, and long-term vitality. If these videos provided you with an insight, a reminder, or even just a spark, let's keep this journey going. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos on ADHD, autism, and weight loss.